The door closed by itself, but that's exactly what saved me. Have you ever stopped to think that sometimes what seems like just a strange detail, an unusual event, might be God himself changing the course of your story? What if what you usually call a coincidence is, in fact, a prophetic deliverance before destruction? How many times has something simple, a slamming door, an unexpected delay, a silent discomfort, prevented you from being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Have you ever experienced this? Today, I want to take you inside a scene that, at first glance, seems small, but which carried an enormous spiritual weight. One of those situations where the natural and the supernatural intersect, where the ordinary becomes a sign, and where God uses the unexpected to protect someone from something they never even imagined. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you, and perhaps even explain some episodes of your own life that you never truly understood. Imagine the feeling. You're at home, the night is calm, everything seems too normal. There's no wind, no noise, nothing to indicate movement. And then, suddenly, the door closes by itself. The sound echoes through the house like a call, as if something invisible were trying to get your attention. Your heart races, your body shivers, and that mixture of fear and curiosity fills the air. In seconds, 1,000 thoughts race through your mind, but there's one especially strong, almost impossible to ignore. This is not normal. It is precisely in these kinds of moments that many ignore the sign. But there are those who perceive that there is a different atmosphere, something spiritual, something that escapes human control. When we talk about prophetic messages, of signs before the fall, we need to understand that God doesn't always act with thunder, visions, or audible revelations. Often he manifests himself in the subtle, the simple, in the detail that seems too small to be miraculous, but which, in fact, carries a gigantic purpose. And that door that closed, it wasn't just wood moving. It was a warning, a redirection, a divine touch saying, "Not here." And perhaps you too have experienced something like this. A door that closed in your life, a relationship that ended without explanation, an opportunity that disappeared, an unexpected change that took you off the path you thought was right. Sometimes it hurts, sometimes it's scary, but when God closes something, he closes it to deliver, protect, and safeguard. As you listen to this story, allow yourself to remember moments when something seemingly meaningless prevented you from moving forward. Perhaps at the time you were irritated, doubted, questioned, but what if that was exactly what saved you? What if you had known what was about to happen? Wouldn't you have seen that small detail as a true miracle? Stay with me until the end, because this scene will make you see your own experiences with new eyes. You'll realize that there are prophetic deliverances before destruction. It happens every day, and many of them go unnoticed. And when that door closed, something much bigger was about to be revealed, something that would completely change the interpretation of that moment, something that would only make sense later. And it is precisely here that the story begins to gain intensity, because what follows shows that that door didn't close by chance. It was the beginning of something that no one could have predicted, but that needed to happen. And while that door remained closed, as if an invisible hand had taken control of the situation, something inside me began to awaken. A mixture of alertness and peace, fear and protection, as if the entire environment were whispering, "Pay attention, this is bigger than it looks." Sometimes, even before we understand what is happening in the physical world, the spirit already knows, feels it, perceives it, and that is precisely why these small signs carry so much meaning. As I recalled that moment, I realized that many people have experienced something similar, perhaps differently, perhaps in another context, but with the same profound feeling that something invisible was working in their favor. And, look, if this topic resonates with you, if at some point in your life you felt a strange shiver, a door closing, a sudden change that later made sense, leave a comment below telling us what has touched you the most so far. It's not just a comment for the sake of commenting. It's a way of showing that you're not alone and that there's a whole community living through similar experiences. And when you share your story, you also inspire and empower someone who might be going through something similar but doesn't know how to interpret it. And if you're feeling that connection, if that message is reaching you in some way, like the video, it helps much more than you imagine. YouTube understands that this type of content matters, that it truly touches people, and it starts delivering it to even more people who need to hear about these things. Prophetic deliverances, about these signs that occur before destruction. Your like is small, but its impact is enormous. And of course, if you like this style of message, These stories that reveal the silent work of God. Subscribe to the channel not only so you don't miss future videos, but because your presence here makes this space stronger, more vibrant, and more relevant. Your subscription shows that there's a purpose to this content, and that's what keeps this message reaching those who truly need it. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. People who may be one step away from ignoring an important sign. People who need to understand that God speaks, God warns, God protects, sometimes in the simplest detail. And while that door remained closed that night, an even stronger feeling began to emerge, as if something was about to be revealed, something that would explain why that moment, seemingly so small, carried such a profound meaning. The house was silent that night, with that kind of silence that seems to fill every corner, as if time paused just to observe what was about to happen. I had just arrived, tired, with that common feeling after a busy day, my head spinning with scattered thoughts, memories of work, postponed decisions, small tensions that we keep pushing to the next day. But, at the same time, there was something different in the air. A kind of gentle weight, a mood I couldn't explain. It was as if the atmosphere was charged with an invisible presence, a vibration that stirred the mind and heart. As I walked down the hallway, I felt that inner whisper, not a voice, not a phrase, but a deep, almost instinctive perception. It was as if my spirit was trying to warn me before my logic could perceive anything. It's curious how, in moments like these, the body reacts before the mind. Breathing changes, the pace slows, we notice details that would normally go unnoticed. I remember looking at the living room door with the feeling that something about it caught my attention, but there was nothing special. It was just a door. Ordinary, like all the others. And yet, there was something there. You know when you get home and feel that the atmosphere is different? It's not fear, it's not anxiety, but a kind of silent warning, as if something is about to happen, even if you have no proof of it. It's exactly this feeling that many people experience before a deliverance, a kind of hidden truth that only reveals itself afterward. At that moment, as I left the keys on the table and took off my shoes, the feeling only intensified. It was as if the house were alive, observing every movement, waiting for the exact moment to reveal its next chapter. There was no sound of wind, no open window, nothing to justify the change in atmosphere. And that's the interesting part. Sometimes life gives warnings, but the warning comes from behind the scenes, in the invisible realm, in that area that doesn't appear in photos or videos, but that shapes the entire journey. Spiritual perception, when awakened, acts like a compass. It doesn't point out what will happen, but it makes you pay attention where you normally wouldn't. I walked slowly, trying to understand why that unease was growing inside me. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper. It was as if my spirit was conversing with something greater, something that was there, in the environment, observing with me. And the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. Some call it intuition, others discernment, others spiritual sensitivity. Call it what you will, all these names point to the same phenomenon. Something inside you perceives before you perceive it. And, in this case, that perception was about to change the course of that night. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because before the moment the door closed, before the sound that would echo through the house and mark that instant as a watershed moment, there was a series of silent signs that, looking back now, make perfect sense. And perhaps you too have experienced moments like that. That inexplicable delay that throws you off course for a few minutes, that small decision that completely alters the course of the evening, that sudden feeling that makes you go back to check something for no apparent reason. These small decisions form an invisible map, a path that we only understand when we look back. It's as if life offers points of attention, small highlights that go unnoticed when we're too busy, too distracted, too rushed. But when we stop and listen more carefully, we realize that these signs aren't random. They carry a message, a direction, a revelation that will only make sense when the main piece of the puzzle finally falls into place. As I prepared something to eat, trying to ignore that strange feeling, I noticed my movements were slower. My mind seemed divided between the simple tasks of routine and that restlessness that insisted on remaining. It was as if I were living two realities at the same time, the normal daily routine and a hidden scenario about to be revealed. And this duality, this mixture of routine and mystery, makes everything even more striking. Life has this curious way of uniting the ordinary and the extraordinary in the same space, in the same minute, without any prior warning. And perhaps that's precisely where the beauty and impact of these deliverances lie. They appear where we least expect them. They don't come accompanied by lights, giant signs, or visible warnings. They appear in the details, in the silence, in what seems unimportant. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that that feeling wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. It was as if something was about to stop me from making a decision that would change everything that night. Write this down. That makes sense to me. I was still there, trying to understand that feeling that made absolutely no sense, when something completely unexpected happened. It was so fast that, for a moment, my body reacted even before my mind processed what was happening. The living room door, which minutes before I had left only slightly ajar, began to move slowly, as if someone on the other side were carefully pushing it. There was no wind, no draft, no logical explanation. Just the soft sound of the wood sliding, followed by a dry click as the lock met the frame and the door slammed shut with a force that echoed throughout the house. The impact of that sound pierced the silence like an arrow, cutting through the air and shattering my calm in two. For a few seconds I was paralyzed, unable to move a single muscle. My mind went into instant alert, as if every part of my body was trying to respond to that sudden break in routine. It was as if the entire environment had changed temperature, as if the air had become denser, laden with a hidden meaning that I wasn't yet ready to decipher. My heart raced, not from panic, but from a strange mixture of fear and awareness. You know when you feel like you've just witnessed something unusual, something completely outside of what you consider normal? That's exactly what struck me at that moment. All I could think was, this is not normal. Confusion came first, like a desperate attempt to find logical explanations to soothe that uncomfortable feeling. Maybe a window was open, but it wasn't. Maybe it was just the wood expanding, but doors don't move on their own like that. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but why at that particular moment? Even trying to justify it, the truth is that my spirit already knew there was something behind it. It was as if the door had closed to prevent something from happening inside or, perhaps, to prevent me from leaving at that instant. And the more I thought about it, the more the feeling grew inside me, as if it were connected to a hidden truth that would only be revealed later. It's interesting how certain experiences make us realize that life isn't just about what we can see. There are invisible movements at play behind the scenes, influencing decisions, delays, encounters, detours, and even small changes in the environment that, in the end, have a huge impact on our journey. And that door closing was one of those movements. There was no denying it. It was too improbable, too strange, too precise to be just a coincidence. Fear, then, combined with a kind of inner warning that I couldn't explain. It wasn't terror, but a deep feeling that there was a greater reason for it happening that way. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more evident it became. That dry sound echoed in my mind like a signal. And it's amazing how, in situations like that, the body perceives before understanding arrives. Breathing becomes shorter, the senses become sharper, and every detail of the environment seems to gain importance, as if the world around me were trying to warn me of something. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when we talk about deliverances, about interventions that happen before destruction, it's necessary to understand that the supernatural often manifests itself in the unusual. And I'm not talking about grand, visible miracles, but about those small phenomena that break our pattern of normality and force us to look beyond what our eyes show. Sometimes God uses precisely what defies logic to prevent the inevitable. He closes doors before we put ourselves in danger, delays paths before we arrive at the wrong time, changes routes before tragedy strikes. And the most curious thing is that, most of the time, we only understand this much later. As I stared at the door, completely closed, a feeling of protection began to mingle with astonishment. It wasn't just about the noise. It was about the exact moment it happened, about the precision, about the emotional impact that simple gesture had. Something inside me told me it wasn't just an object moving. It was as if an invisible purpose had knocked on the door to get my attention, to make me stop, breathe, and realize that something bigger was happening that night. The transformation wasn't just in the event itself, but in how it affected me, in the mindset that changed when I realized that small things can carry big messages. And, remembering that moment, I realized how these signs appear when we least expect them. They interrupt routine, destabilize logic, an open space for revelations that only make sense when we are willing to see beyond appearances. Perhaps that door was closing a risk, a path, a hasty decision. Perhaps it was preventing me from leaving at the exact wrong second, or from being in a place where something dangerous could happen. And the more I think about it, the clearer it becomes that the supernatural acts in much more subtle ways than we imagine. My mind began to work differently, as if it were rearranging all the pieces that didn't fit together before. It was as if that noise, that unexpected movement, had opened a new perspective within me, a silent but profound change. And that feeling stayed with me, pulsating, waiting for the right moment to become understanding. Write this down. I'm on this journey too. When I finally managed to move again, my heart still pounding as if trying to warn me of something my eyes couldn't see, I went to the window. It was almost instinctive, as if something inside me was saying, "Look outside." The street seemed normal at first glance, with that typical nighttime silence, but there was an unease in the air, something I couldn't explain. Then, seconds later, something happened before my eyes that made my breath catch in my chest. A car sped down the street, completely out of control, skidding on the wet asphalt as if the driver had lost control of the steering wheel. The sound of the tires scraping the ground echoed in a way that seemed to cut to the soul. That scene happened so fast that it took my mind a few moments to process what I was seeing. The car passed by exactly on the same stretch where I used to walk every night, at the same time, following my automatic ritual of going out for a bit to breathe. And in that instant, when that out-of-control vehicle sped forward without any chance of braking, I understood that if I had left home at the normal time, if I had maintained my usual routine, if that door hadn't closed unexpectedly, I would be there. There was no denying it. The mathematics of destiny seemed too clear, too precise, almost frightening. That door hadn't just closed, it had kept me inside. My whole body shuddered inside. The shock of the revelation came like a powerful wave that hit me from head to toe, bringing such profound understanding that it almost drained my strength. It was as if the sky had pulled back a veil and shown, for a few seconds, what was happening behind the scenes of my journey. This was no coincidence. Couldn't be. That car wasn't just passing by. It was crossing a timeline that would have intersected with mine if something hadn't interfered minutes before. And the more I looked at that street, the more I felt that that moment carried a purpose that I was still trying to absorb. I stood there for a long time, observing the empty street after the abrupt passage of that vehicle, trying to understand all the details. The feeling was a mixture: relief, astonishment, gratitude, fear, and an awareness so profound that it seemed to illuminate thoughts I didn't even know I had. It was as if the hidden truth had finally been revealed. That deliverance didn't come with trumpets, it didn't come with grand signs, it didn't come with an audible voice. It came with the sound of a door closing. A simple gesture, almost insignificant, but which in that context carried the weight of a transformation I would never forget. And while I was trying to digest all of that, something even stronger happened: spiritual understanding. You know, when understanding doesn't come from logic, but from the Spirit. It was as if a silent phrase was placed inside me, with a clarity I couldn't ignore. God delivers you before destruction. He acts in silence, but never fails. That phrase burned inside me as if it were written in fire. Because, looking at that scene outside, it was impossible not to recognize that there was a greater intervention behind it all. I began to remember other times in my life when seemingly strange things had happened: delays, setbacks, changes of course, and which at the time had irritated or confused me. But now I saw that many of those moments were perhaps exactly that: silent detours that took me away from dangerous paths. Each detail seemed to gain a new meaning: the door closing, the strange feeling that preceded everything, the restlessness in my spirit, the heightened perception. All of this formed a much larger narrative than I had imagined. And the more I thought about it, the more I understood that life is full of these moments. Small decisions that change big destinies. Invisible movements that align us with a greater purpose. Revelations that only manifest when we are sensitive enough to recognize them. As if the entire journey were being accompanied by a constant presence that observes, directs, prevents, protects. The feeling was so strong that I could almost physically feel the spiritual impact of that event. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there are moments in life when the supernatural acts so precisely that there's no denying it. It's as if God is writing a story behind the scenes, adjusting every step, every minute, every detail to keep us away from what would try to destroy us. And when these pieces finally fit together, the feeling that arises is one of reverence. We understand that we are not walking alone, that there is a hand guiding, protecting, intervening, and this perception changes everything. It changes our mindset, it changes how we see daily life, it even changes our decisions from now on. Looking again at the closed door, it was impossible not to feel a spiritual weight in that simple gesture. It was as if that door had been a shield, a boundary that kept me exactly where I needed to be. And the more I understood this, the more I realized that the true climax of that moment wasn't in the sound of the slam, but in the meaning of what it prevented. It was a revelation that transformed everything around it. Comment below, that makes sense to me. And when I look at all this, I can't help but think that, just as that door closed to prevent something tragic, there are situations in our lives where doors also begin to move in a strange way. Sometimes they make no noise at all. Sometimes they close slowly. Sometimes they seem to slam in our faces. And almost always our first reaction is to feel frustrated, irritated, confused, because the human mind has this habit of thinking that what didn't go our way is automatically something bad. But there's a hidden truth that many people don't realize. Not every closed door is a loss. Some are salvation. And that's why this story isn't just about something that happened to a specific person, but about a spiritual pattern that repeats itself throughout the life of those who learn to discern. It's as if God, in silence, works behind the scenes of our path, rearranging trajectories, diverting dangers, altering small details that completely change the course of an entire journey. And the most curious thing is that, while this is happening, we are always too busy trying to understand why the door closed, when, in fact, the real focus should be on what is this saving me from. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a spiritual layer to these experiences that's almost never discussed. Many people look at signs like this as coincidences, as chance occurrences, as small interruptions in daily life. But when you start to notice how frequently these deviations arise at specific moments, always before critical moments, it becomes difficult to ignore their impact. It's as if there's an invisible alignment between what you plan and what God allows, not to limit you, but to ensure that you arrive where you need to arrive, whole, protected, and ready to continue. And perhaps that's why so many people today carry the feeling of being stuck. They look at doors that have closed, relationships, jobs, opportunities, paths that seemed promising, and think that it was all a mistake, a setback, an injustice. But if they knew what awaited them just ahead, they wouldn't complain for a second. The thing is, humans only see the surface, but God sees the whole road, including that which could destroy our peace, our faith, our mindset, and even our lives. Sometimes, He prevents you from entering places where you see no danger, but where the future would hold something too heavy for you to bear. Sometimes, He removes a person from your life, not because they were bad, but because, going a little further, they would become an obstacle to your transformation. Sometimes, He closes a door because, if you took one more step in that direction, you would lose something that you may not value so much today, but that later you will recognize as an essential part of your identity. This is discernment. This is protection. This is love in the form of guidance. And this is where everything connects even more deeply, because when you start looking at life with this awareness, even delays take on a different meaning. That day when something went wrong, that call that didn't happen, that invitation that was canceled at the last minute, all of that may have been part of a silent movement to take you off course from an event that you never knew, and perhaps never will know, existed. Yes, it's uncomfortable, because we like control. We like predictability. We like feeling like we know exactly what we're doing. But there's a point in the journey where you realize that true wisdom isn't about preventing doors from closing, but about recognizing that some doors need to close so that you can continue to live, emotionally and spiritually. And when you accept that, something changes. Your mindset changes. The way you see the unexpected changes. You begin to realize that God doesn't only work in the extraordinary that impresses, but also in the ordinary that goes unnoticed. He acts in the common, in the everyday, in the detail, in the exact minute. He acts in the small pauses, in the detours, in the inconvenient delays, in the no's that you don't understand at the time, but that prevent damage you would never see coming. And perhaps today you are exactly at that point, living through something that doesn't make sense, a door that closed without warning, a transition that seems unfair, a change you didn't ask for. And it's difficult. It's confusing, but there's something happening behind it that you haven't seen yet. Something that is saving you before the fall. Because doors don't close randomly when God is in control. They close with purpose, with precision, with intention. And when you understand this, frustration begins to transform into peace. Doubt begins to transform into confidence. And what seemed like a delay reveals itself as part of a greater protection. This is the revelation that changes the journey. This is the truth that gives new meaning to the path. And it is precisely because of this perspective that, instead of fighting against every door that closes, you begin to ask, what is this saving me from facing? And this simple question has the power to completely alter the emotional impact of what you experience, because it takes you out of the place of revolt and puts you in the place of understanding, even when you don't yet know the complete answer. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a part of this silent protection that many people ignore, and it's precisely the part that most transforms our path. But before continuing, leave a simple phrase in the comments so I know you're with me on this reflection. That makes sense to me. And when we begin to see these signs more clearly, a realization slowly dawns on our soul. Nothing that happens without explanation is truly random. There is a divine intelligence guiding details that seem invisible to our eyes, but which reveal a